What is up, guys and gals? Welcome back to another chess video. This is me, JK Jax, back at it again. Today I'm going to be covering how to play the Caro-Kann defense. Now, the Caro-Kann is a great opening. It's good for beginners, good for even expert players, and even grandmasters play it. So today I'm going to be showing you how to play that opening. So it starts with e4, c6, d4, d5, the Caro-Kann defense, and there's really only like 4 variations that you will see: the advance, the exchange, the classical, and of course f3, the fantasy variation. Today's video I'm going to be covering the advanced variation only. c5 is my recommendation. I mean, you can play f5, bishop f5. You have my blessing, but you have to really study what to do against bishop to f5. So I recommend the move c5 instead. After pawn to c3, you will play moves like knight to c6. Now, instead of c3, the opponent can do multiple things. Take knight f3, and of course, c3, as what we're going to be covering in this line. You will play knight to c6, developing the knight, and the main idea of the Caro-Kann is that you will play e6 at some point to obtain this light square pawn chain, this very nice pawn wall, while simultaneously trying to put pressure against the d4 pawn. The rule of thumb in the Caro-Kann is that if black manages to win white's d4 pawn, black is better, full stop. So that's why you play knight to c6 here to put pressure against the d4 pawn. Now, white has a few ways to play. Number 1 is bishop to e2, number 2 is to pin the knight, and number 3 is to play knight to f3. If they do something like this, a slow move, your general idea is going to be bishop to f5, e6, and let's just say we play the moves. Let's say they actually take the pawn here. You will play knight takes e5, so they can't take. I mean, they can. It will be fine to take. Let's say they play bishop to e3, you simply continue piling up the pressure against the d4 pawn. Now, if they take, you will take the b2 pawn, knight d2, and then now the move pawn to e6, trying to go back, something like this, go queen a3, bishop c5, bishop takes on c5, and you just have a great position while being a pawn up, and that's probably what black wants to do. If bishop to e2, bishop g5, knight to f3, your very nice idea of bishop to g4. So what do you do with bishop to g4? Number 1, it allows the f5 square. It opens up the f5 square for the knight to jump through with moves like pawn to e6, knight to e7, and knight to f5. Secondly, you're going to take one of the defenders of the d4 pawn. So what you might see is that you will take the d4 pawn first, and then you take the knight, then you take the d4 pawn. The plan is super simple. So that's why I recommend this variation of the Caro-Kann. Against knight to f3, which is the second best move, I recommend just taking first, relieve the pawn tension, and then you pin the knight. So again, the same idea as I talked about before, opening up the f5 square. I mean, this time, the purpose of it is not to open up the f5 square. The bishop wasn't originally on f5. The point is that you develop out the bishop first before you close in that pawn chain with the move pawn to e6, as we talked about earlier. The general idea of the Caro, pawn chain, put pressure against d4 pawn, same thing. So a few moves to play here. If bishop to e3, you simply play pawn to e6, and with moves like, let's say, bishop d3, you will play bishop b4 check, so you bring up the bishop first before you play your idea of knight e7, knight f7, knight f5, knight e7, knight f5. But if you play knight e7 right away, it is fine for black, but it blocks in the dark square bishop. So preferably you want to develop it out first, and after knight to c3, then you can play knight e7, knight f5. So if they block the pin, however, you play pawn to e6, go on with the idea, castles, knight e7 to go knight f5, knight c3 to develop a piece, and then knight f5. From this position on, white has 2 engine-like moves and 2 natural moves. The engine-like move is knight e1, which in that case you will take the bishop and again develop as usual. So let's say knight e1 takes, and you play bishop to e7 and castles, and then rook c8. And then you pile up the pressure against the d4 pawn by playing moves like queen b6. And if knight g5, same thing, you take, and they have to take with the knight, or else they will lose the d4 pawn, and black is better. Remember, black wins the d4 pawn, black is better, full stop. Okay, so they have to take with the knight. All other moves losers for white, and then you will still continue to pile up the pressure against the d4 pawn. So now it's down to the natural moves. Bishop to g5 is one of the ways that the opponent might play. In this case, you will play queen b6. And you have to remember this line. If they go knight a5, you go queen a5. And let's say they go back bishop e3, you go bishop e7 and castle. And the future idea is this. At some point, you want to play pawn to b5, and then you slide your queen back to b6. So you first kick out the knight, so it goes back to somewhere like c3. Then you can bring your queen back to b6 and put pressure against the d4 pawn. And how you're going to win it is, of course, you remove the knight first before you safely take the pawn on d4. Simple as that. Another natural move they will play is the move bishop to e3. Now against bishop to e3, what I recommend you to do is go bishop e7 and castle. The idea is very simple. So let's say they play something like rook to c1, something natural like, let's take control of the open file, you castle. And let's say they play something like h3. Your idea is that you will take the knight, and after takes, you will play bishop to g5, exchanging your dark square bishop for white dark square bishop, which is a key defender of the d4 pawn. So you're removing one of the key defenders, and if takes, black is slightly better here, you are going to pick up that d4 pawn next, and it's very difficult for white to play here. So that's it for knight f3. Instead of knight f3, the opponent can play bishop to b5, and in this case, I recommend the move queen a5. Queen a5 attacks the bishop. It's very immediate, and also just pins this pawn to the king, so the d4 pawn is actually less defended. There are 3 moves the opponent can play. I mean, technically 4, but there's the 3 best ways and 1 not so good way. There's also another one line that is the bishop goes back, you just take, and yeah, you're just simply up a pawn. You can take again, and after knight takes c3, you are simply up a pawn here, and just play regular chess. You play bishop to g4, e6, bishop b4, your typical Caro ideas. Now this time, since the opponent does not have the d4 pawn, you will go for the e5 pawn next. So after queen a5, they can go bishop a4. Against bishop to a4, I recommend you take. If queen takes, you play e6, and then you go bishop to c5. Simple as that. And you play bishop d7, rook c8. Just continue developing, maybe even shift your knight to f5. The plans are so simple for black. And another move by white is b4. You will just go back queen c7, and same thing. Okay, if they take, no worries, stay calm. You play moves like bishop d7, e6, and you're gonna take back this pawn. And of course, they can also take the knight. Taking the knight, you will take. If they take, you will take with the queen. If knight d2, however, you can simply take in the center first, and then e6. Again, same ideas. Knight e7, knight f5. You develop the bishop out. This time, your bishop might even go to a6 and control this very nice light square diagonal that prevents the opponent from castling kingside. And if they take, you take with the queen. Knight f3, and I like this computer idea so much. Queen b6. It's a very subtle move, and what does it do? Queen b6 prevents this dark square bishop from developing. So if they develop, they'll lose the b2 pawn. Another idea is that if you ever get attacked, let's say at some point in the future they go h4, h5, you can slide back to queen c7 and put pressure against the e5 pawn. Now this is the pawn you should be going for, because it's not easy to defend this e5 pawn at all. As you can see, there's no more d4 pawn, so there's no such thing as a d4 pawn weakness. However, missing that d4 pawn induced another weakness, which is the e5, and you can't really push your pawns to defend that pawn. You can only use pieces at this point. Or you have to waste the move by moving the knight away, and then you defend, which is just not ideal for white. So like, yeah, knight f3, queen b6, you'll go e6, knight e7, maybe you might consider knight g6 this time, or you can go with the original idea of going knight f5 to trade out this dark square bishop if it ever tries to protect or something. And you know, again, bishop to a6. Let's move on to another variation. So after the c5 line, they can also choose to take. When taking, I recommend move pawn at e6. You fixate that pawn structure and you're telling your opponent that, hey, my light square bishop is going to be a defensive piece. And from here on out, there are two moves by white. They can choose to give a check, but giving a check is pretty much useless because you will block with the bishop. And after takes, now this c pawn is going to fall and the e pawn. So white is guaranteed to lose one of these pawns right here. They can't defend both at once, okay? It's hard to defend both at once. Even the c pawn is undefendable. It's attacked twice. So after e6, white can play two moves here. Bishop to e3 and pawn to a3. Pawn to a3 tries to play for b4 in the future after the bishop takes on c5. Let's cover the move bishop to e3 first, because I feel this is the most natural way to play. Knight d7, so now you're piling up the pressure against these two pawns. The best move by white is to pin your knight. You will go knight e7, and again your idea is to go knight f5 and trade out this dark square bishop, which is a key defender of these two pawns, okay? The idea of c3 is very subtle. If the knight goes to f5 and the bishop lands on d4, you can take, and you have this d pawn that is hard to target, which simultaneously defends both e5 and c5 at once. It's a very smart idea. But I recommend here is the move a6, attacking the bishop. Now the bishop has to take. Now they don't take and go back. Now you go knight c6 to break this pin, and now this knight will win one of these pawns eventually. Let's say they go bishop d4, you simply take the pawn on c5. So yeah, you're going to be losing one of their central pawns as white. So the best move right here is to take, because your d7 knight is insanely strong. You want to remove a strong piece for your bad piece. In the sense that light square bishop isn't really that bad. And look, take a look at this structure. I mean, double c pawns, you're going to target them and win them back. So let's say they play knight f3, you play knight f5, trying to take out the dark square bishop. Bishop goes to d4, you will takes, and b6. So although they did defend those two pawns, you are going to be offering them another pawn, the b6 pawn. And if they take, it will activate your queen, and you're actually better here slightly. Right now, the point of taking back and opening up this side of the board, once your queen goes onto b6, it puts pressure against d4 and plans to take on b2. So for example, if the opponent goes pawn b3, trying to defend the b pawn, you simply go bishop to b5 first to prevent the king from castling, and then you go moves like bishop f4 and rook c8. Very simple, okay? And let's say they play queen to b3, trying to trade the queens, okay, and block the connection on the b2 pawn. You will play rook b8, and the idea is that if the queen takes, you will take back with the rook, and your ideas are very simple. Right now, this pawn is being threatened, they have to save it, and you play the move rook to c6. It is very tricky, and your idea is that you're going to go to the back rank and check and possibly win a rook. So that's it for this particular line of the Caro-Kann. Now, after taking, one last variation, a3. Against a3, you just take the pawn. If they play b4, kicking out your bishop, you will slide back to e7, where it is comfortable and cozy. And now your idea in this variation of Caro-Kann is to break up this pawn chain on b4 and a3. They overextended their pawns, and they haven't really developed any of their pieces. So what you plan to do is to just break these two pawns, just open up the position, and win these two pawns. So let's say they go knight f3, you first play f6. Now f6 is a very important move. This is another idea in this variation of the Caro-Kann against the a3 variation, which is to play f6. After takes, you take back with the bishop, and look at this bishop. It's a monstrous bishop controlling 4 squares in the opponent's territory plus h4, so that's a 5. But look at this, it's insane. Now the opponent has to spend one move, saving the rook. Now you play the move that I told you, a5. You're blowing up the queen side, opening up the position, and you're winning. So let's say they take the pawn, you don't even take back yet, you continue developing. And at some point, you're in no rush to take the pawn on a5, it's not going anywhere. Let's say they try to defend, e5. And now you're threatening to play e4 and the knight has to go back. It is an insane position. And black is way better here. Plans is very simple. You go e4, kicking the knight back to its starting square. Then you play moves like bishop e6 and then threaten d4. So it's a very nice position for black, and black is in control of the game here. It has a steering wheel. So they won't take. Instead they'll go bishop b2, challenging the dark square diagonal itself. You go a5 to break up the queenside pawn structure from white. You want to break up these two pawns and open up the position on the king. Let's say they go b5, trying to prevent, any captures, which will open up this dark square diagonal, which is dangerous for white. You go knight d7, simply to put pressure against the e5 pawn. So the great thing about the Caro is that it has multiple plans and it's very flexible. So another idea other than breaking up the king side, if that plan fails, now you shift your attention towards the e5 pawn. At some point, you want to go knight h6, knight f7 to put extra pressure against e5 pawn, tempting the opponent to take the f pawn, which is what you want. You want the central pawns, and you can challenge black's dark. You can challenge the dark square diagonal from h8 all the way to a1. So let's say they go bishop to d3, a normal developing move. You go knight h6, knight d2, and knight f7, as what I told you. The only move in the position is to play e takes f6. Any other move loses. Bishop takes on f6, bishop takes, queen takes. Again, another only move. Any other move loses. Okay, so here, let's say they try to defend the bishop, you can take. And if they take back, you simply play the move pawn e5, and now you're threatening your fork. Of course, you're going to castle first before you fork. So let's say they try to pin your pawn to the king. You can simply castle first. You can also straight away go e4. That's pretty good as well. But I prefer to delay it a bit first before doing anything crazy. So they can't do that. They can't defend. So they have to take, queen takes. And now the move pawn to c4 to try and break up this pawn center of yours. The thing about this variation is that black gets the center and white plans to try to destroy the center. But we are of course going to attack the bishop first. And after the bishop slides back to c2, a4, and white has a tough time trying to develop this light square bishop. It is trapped behind bars. It's literally has zero mobility, okay? The only place it can go is b1 and a2. At this point, don't even play chess, okay? So after something like castles, you will play the move pawn b6 to prevent the light square bishop from ever getting out. It's in a jail cell. It's a convicted criminal and it can't get out. Let's say they go queen b1, trying to make space to go d1, something like this. You play h6, and now this light square bishop isn't even staring at anything at this point. This battery is completely useless, and they can go cry a river. Let's say they go bishop g4. You can castle, and takes, and you get a great position here. This is much better for you. Now your ideas are very simple, is to take, and at some point in time you'll play moves like bishop b7 and completely destroy the king side. So that's it for the Caro-Kann defense. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.